Alright, so we're holding Siman Tzadik Aleph, because Basar בחלב towards the end. Mikvaot Zayin and Ches, pretty short seifim. To go over a couple of nekudas from where we left off, we're talking about Melicha. How Melicha, in various situations, poses a problem, as much as, or very, very similar to tzli, to bishul. It all depends what's involved. Meliach is keroiseach. In other words, it does resemble a form of resicha, and that resicha is on the level of tzli, not exactly like bishul. And when we said meliach keroseach, we did emphasize that it is particularly true when it's eno nechal machmas molchoi. That was a very important point that we pointed it out, because then we're dealing with a situation where there's, because of the saltiness, either in drawing out the blood from a piece of meat, or in preserving the meat, the vast amount of saltiness is what causes this tremendous amount of heat to take place. What if it was just a little bit of salt? Apparently it would not be a problem. But we did say that the Ramah is machmir, unless there's an hefsed meruba, a melicha letzli. Melicha letzli means that it was just salted a little bit. In other words, you're about to tzli to a piece of liver, it requires a little melicha, and even that melicha we would be machmir, unless of course it's a hefsed meruba. There were, of course, differences between what exactly was salty. If we're talking about cheese, and it usually, of course, works this way, that whichever is the one that's salty gets away with it. In Basar b'chalav, it's the one that's unsalted that is the one that gets the blias. The one that is salted itself is not so much the problem. When it's Basar b'chalav, Basar and Gvina.
You mean afuke salting? Is that what you're talking about?
No, we're talking about Melicha right now. That the one that is salted in Basar v'chalav, Basar and Gvina, the one that's salted usually does not have so much of a problem, unless it was a tzolul, unless it was in liquid. That's a little bit different. But in Isser, of course, if the Isser is the one that's salted, it's going to be mavli and maflit into the heter. In other words, we're not concerned about it not getting anything. It's Isser. In Basar b'chalav, we're concerned about both. But because it's the salted one, it's in some ways it's protected from receiving anything the gvina.
Or from the unsalted.
Or from the unsalted one, yeah. So it always works like that the one that is the very salted one is mavli into that one. But there were some situations where, of course, we said it was a little bit different if it was liquid. And we did emphasize that once everything is completely dry meaning completely dry, without any lachluchis in it, then it does not pose a problem, then it resembles tzoinen. As the Mechaber and the Ramah also both pretty much agree that if something is completely dry, there's no lachluchis from the Melicha, there's no, I guess, how would you say lachluchis? A little bit of humidity. Moisture, that's the word, right? Then it's completely dry, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything unless, of course, you're dealing, again, with liquid. If something is soaking in liquid, it will absorb. Especially if that liquid, the chalav, as the Shach points out, is salty in itself. Then, perhaps it in itself, the milk, will become usher too.
Now, when the salt is involved, we have a whole halacha regards under kavush.
Right.
And we have a different halacha under Melicha Keroseach.
Right.
Now, when we have both involved, liquid and salt, of the halacha supply, the liquid or the ones of salt?
Yeah, well, here we're not dealing with halacha of kavush. We're dealing.
I'm asking.
Right. So we're only dealing with the halacha of Melicha, and one being maluach is already a problem. Kol shekain if the two are salted, and kol shekain if you're involving yourself with a liquid, as we will soon see. There are situations where even though something is dry, where in other words, even if it's dry, it would still be able to absorb. Absorption can happen in other ways. Even though naturally, just because if it's dry, it wouldn't be mavliya, it wouldn't be boilea. I mean, depending on, of course, on what's involved here, everything is dry. It's like tzoinen. Right. So, but that's what we're going to see in the next seifim. There are certain circumstances that change the dynamics over here of this piece of meat, even though it's dry. We will see that. In other words, so far we've covered just the basic melicha. We spoke about what happens when it's completely dry. We gave the example of what happens if it's in liquid, that the liquid, by falling into liquid, then it's absorbing, as long as it's a little bit wet. The question is, does the milk become asur or not? So the Shach says, if it's salty, even though it is the salted one, it will also become, it may possibly become asur too because it's liquid. So things work a little bit differently. Because based on the Mechaber alone, we weren't dealing with all these unique situations. It was only, everything was Basar, Gvina, Yavesh, But there are times that what we've learned so far may, in other words, the halachas will not apply. There may be a different halacha, and we will see when. What if something is baked? What if something is roasted? In other words, all of a sudden we see that it could be that this piece of meat that we thought that was not going to be affected will be affected because it has changed. It is its composition. Would that be the right word? The composition of it, because of how it has been processed. All right. So anyway, before we go on to the next seif, I just want to review the halacha of tzir again, because we briefly went over it. The Ramah discusses tzir, as we know from Hilchos Taaruvot, is also hot. And the shear of tzir is a few minutes. It can cause trouble within a few minutes. So the Ramah basically says that tzir is nechshav keroseach even b'melicha. In other words, even though you didn't over-salted this meat, it was just Melicha sli, but there's sear coming out. That sear, if there's sear coming out, that sear is roteach pretty much almost immediately. Because that which we said by Melicha, sli, that it's a chumrah, in other words, that because we're not baki between how much salt you need, right? So we said Melicha for sli is a chumrah, right? Because we don't know how much salt produces that heat. But when it comes to tzir, we say it's always roseach.
Now, when Melicha by tzli, are we being salted for tzli?
For tzli.
So it's still a raw piece of meat?
Yes, it's still a raw piece of meat, it's not as much salt.
And that's not being roasted yet?
Not yet.
So Melicha for tzli goes on the quantity
of salt, right. And so we said that's a chumrah. The Ramah says it's a chumrah. So that's a chumrah legabe the basar itself. Legabe the tzir that comes out, it's not a chumrah. He says even behefsed meruba, it would be considered always reseach.
Now the tzir is now with the combination of.
Yes, that's exactly it. So when you have, therefore, because tzir is somewhat together with salt, when you have, according to all the Deah supposedly, it would be understood that if you're being moileach something likdeira, which was the term used to describe to draw out the blood, right? Even though it was not kashir, the 18 minutes, which we said is a machlekes, do you have to wait for it to become strong, or does it become right away as it's drawing the blood? Even according to those who, like the Ran, it's not there yet. No. If it's enough salt, likdeira, as soon as tzir comes out, however, that tzir, even during the first few minutes coming out, it would already aser.
But the tzir would aser.
Right. That's if there would be tzir there, right.
How about the meat would not become aser if the tzir? The meat itself.
The meat may not be yet roseach enough, according to the Ran, but tzir coming out of that, it would be roseach.
The reason I asked was because that whatever is salted,
right, and
the other part becomes aser.
Right.
So normally, if the meat is salted and the milk is not salted, then the gvina should become aser and it should be okay.
Yes.
But now that we have tzir involved, like a third party,
right?
Is this called the meat is salty and the gvina becomes aser, or is this called the tzir is salty?
This is called the
tzir. Asers both of them.
No, it doesn't aser both of them. The tzir becomes roseach, and it asers the gvina if it falls on it.
But the salt is still protecting the
yes
against the tzir.
Yes. Yeah, the tzir is coming out.
And the tzir itself cannot even aser the meat because the tzir is become aser.
No, well, the tzir, remember the tzir has to flow. The tzir has to flow away from the meat. Yeah, so it's liquid.
It's liquid, it does become aser from the
tzir. On the gvina, if it falls on the gvina, it asers the gvina.
It's connected to the gvina.
Yes.
But connected to that tzir that's flowing in that direction.
No.
It's not mifas.
Yeah, the plitas no, right. And the Ramah talks about tzir falling on a keli. We're talking about blood, remember here, right?
Well, no, tzir is not blood. It's just the
but the tzir from Basar is blood.
No,
it contains blood.
It
contains blood. Yes.
Sure.
Right.
But so the reason I'm asking is because when we normally have liquids boiling,
right,
then the liquid that is boiling is the agent that is responsible, that transferred
Okay.
Who is transferring? Who causes the transfer of taste? It's boiling liquid.
Yes.
So if we have now tzir, it's in the category of boiling liquid because of the salt and liach karosea.
Yeah.
So really the tzir is fulfilling the function of, let's say, water in a pot where meat is being boiled. Because it's liach karosea.
Yeah. Well, he
But
means
it has likely the same status as though it was boiling.
at least kedei klipa. In other words.
I'm not saying,
It's not completely a little confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, so that's the invitation to clarify that.
Yeah.
Because what Melicha Karosea is supposed to tell us is, once it's salted, it has the status as though it was cooking.
Right.
No, he said it's different than fish.
Yeah. In other words, no, he means just the term in Hebrew, meliach keroseach, but in reality, it's not.
Well, so we'll
like
explain the
bishop.
difference
Right.
in a second.
Right.
But right now, the sear has the same role as any liquid that is boiling, and we can make differences and distinctions.
Right.
And the difference, by the way, between Li and cooking and bishul is that in Li there is no water, no water involved.
No water involved.
But since here we're talking specifically about the tzir, which is a liquid.
Yes.
So the first question would be: is Meliach Karosea here still? Is this a case of tzli with liquid? Halacha of tzli is being applied to liquid.
What? No, not exactly.
Because it's Meliach Karosea.
Right.
But what's tzli, and supposedly there has a halacha a din of tzli.
It all depends on how the contact was made. Was it sitting between the meat or the gvina or whatever that was affected by tzir? We spoke about the difference versus, was if something is sitting in the tzir or whether the tzir fell on it.
But sitting would be kavush, no?
Sitting is a form of kavush. As the Pri Megadim explains that halacha melicha.
Different halacha.
In other words, the reason why the shear there is less, than a regular melicha is because it's a form of kavush. In other words, there's no steer in the mechaber. Right. So it all depends how the tzir affected
But now the tzir is just flowing out.
Yes.
Flowing, and it touches the gvina.
Yes.
So if it was the meat itself that was salted to touch gvina,
Right.
so both of them are dry.
Yeah, but there's going to be a kedei klipa.
But now we have a tzir involved,
Right.
which is a liquid.
Right. Remember, this tzir has a different composition than regular water, whatever you want. It's something that is hot, it's spicy, whatever you want to call it, and it will answer at least a kedei klipa upon contact. The question was, when? Does it have to wait? No. The answer is, Rama says pretty much right away. Tzir is salty. As soon as it begins to come out, it's roiseach enough to answer kedei klipa, even if you hold like the shitas, that the melach and the basar does not produce a basar that is meliach keroisech until after 18 minutes. The tzir coming out within the first few minutes is already roisech.
But the tzir here is treated as though it was dry, not as though it was a...
Right. Not exactly.
In other words, it doesn't make a difference with respect to roisech. It doesn't make a difference liquid and not...
Right, that doesn't make a difference. No. Yeah. Anyway, so the Rashba explains, I think the Gra brings down this Rashba, that the reason why tzir is different is because the basar is not, even though the basar is not considered eno necha, the basar is not considered eno necha machmas molcho in the beginning. Even though we say in the early stages it's not necha, it's still, it's still not hot. Nevertheless, the tzir is. The tzir is already considered eno necha machmas molcho because that was the criteria. Is something eno necha machmas molcho. So the Rashba says the reason you would have a difference between the basar and the tzir is that tzir is already considered eno necha machmas molcho, whereas the basar may not be yet. In other words, it could still be necha machmas molcho. So therefore, the Meforshim explain that according to the Mechaber, who goes by the shita that something does not become asa right away until the shear of Melicha, in the case of basar and gevina that are both salted, the reason why he doesn't mention anything about the tzir is because there's no tzir. Obviously, if there would be tzir, then he would say, but wait a minute, I agree about the tzir part, but I'm not talking about the tzir. So they explain the reason why he doesn't concern himself with the tzir, which is roiteach even before the 18 minutes, is because there is no tzir. In other words, in Mechaber's case, tzir is not an issue. But it appears to be, from what everybody writes, I think, about the Mechaber, that the Mechaber would also agree with this, that tzir is different than meliach on the basar. In other words, that the basar taking time to become meliach keroseach versus the tzir not needing that time and being already roseach as soon as it comes out. If it's there. If it's not there, in other words, if it's not a problem, if it's not affecting the cheese, if it's not affecting other food, then obviously I don't have to mention it. I mean, he does mention tzir in Taaruvot, but it appears to be that he would also hold that the tzir would be roseach right away. Now, the Taz, in bringing the Bach, we got a famous story that takes place, that is brought down in Trumas Hadeshin about a treif duck that was salted by mistake with kosher ducks. There was a big problem over there. And there was a shaila about the problem occurring after the salt had already drawn out the blood. I believe that was the case over there. In other words, that the mixture or the problem was at a stage where the salt had already drawn out the blood. So we said that there is an opinion, after all, that says that toshash koicha, remember, that the melech after a certain point is not really meliach keruseach if it already did something to draw out the blood, especially. So if we can rely on that, that means that what is happening now that they're together will not be a problem, at least behefsed meruba. So the Bach says, but wait a minute, what about all the tzir that's there? We don't say toshash koicha by tzir, do we? In other words, the Meliach, you could say that, okay, great, we have a good heter here, that if the problem arises after the salt already had done its job, and there is an opinion that toshash koicha after 18 minutes when it drew out blood, if that's the case, maybe we don't have to worry about it. So the Taz explains, no, if you have tzir, by tzir, the Bach says, well, what about the tzir? So the Taz says, you're right, the tzir would be a problem if you held lo toshash koicha. But if you hold toshash koicha of the melach, then you also hold toshash koicha of the tzir. That's the Taz's explanation over there on that particular problem. You follow me? In other words, if even the Bach says good, what about the tzir that's going to be there? According to the opinions that toshash koicha, so what? So the Taz says, according to the opinion of toshash koicha of the melach, and you may want to rely on that, then you also say that the tzir, or the melach in the tzir, lost its strength too, and then it wouldn't pose a problem. Otherwise, if the tzir is there, obviously, it will be just as much as an issue as anywhere else. But that's a very interesting explanation to say that the melach in the tzir, or what makes it hot, that also has become weakened by the fact that it's that a certain amount of time passed by, which is interesting because by learning these halachos, you don't see that. We don't see that the tzir changes in any sense. That's because we only spoke about melach for the most part, and in melach there's machlokes. But tzir would well, the thing is that this is not ordinary tzir. This is tzir with salt, right? This is a mixture of tzir with salt, and that's what making it roseach. So this salt in this tzir maybe is also weak. If the melach in the tzir is weak, then the tzir doesn't really have that much koach. That's the only way I understand the Taz. Right? I mean, he's saying that if you're concerned about the tzir also after a while would lose its strength because it's no longer the same tzir as the tzir coming out. When it's first coming out, it has after a certain amount of time, maybe it loses that rusicha.
Would it make a difference after the 18 minutes?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, right, continuous flow.
Continuously for quite a while.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that could be a problem. Yeah. So then you would have to figure out, is this here?
Is there any way to figure we may go
No. Well, we'd be machma because during that time that it's coming out, it's roseach. Remember, with the tzir, upon regular contact, it's only a klipa. It's not the end of the world. Meliach keruseach, so far we've learned, is kedei klipa. Now we're going to go into the other possibilities of what Melicha can do under different circumstances. So far, for the most part, we saw that it's keklipa, and that there's no real din of tatol gover either. In other words, everything is a klipa. All right. So before we go to Se'ivav, quick review of some basics. In Bishul, Issa Beheter, we have a problem. Bishul, what it does is make the entire heter osir. Because of the way hot water works, it's mavliya, the tam of the Isser, all over the chatichas heter. Right? So far, so good. What's the din by tzli? We're going down one level. As we learned in Hilchos Taaruvot, by tzli, when you roast them close to each other, there's contact, there's heat, but there's no water. There's a machlokes. What's a machlokes by tzli? Is it a kedei netila or kedei klipa? For the most part, that's the machlokes by tzli. And in Melicha, we saw that it was kedei klipa too. Okay, now that we know the basic difference between bishul, tzli, and Melicha, we need to keep in mind that the din of tzli, as it was said, is only b'shneim kchushim, when the two, iser v'heter, are both lean. Neither of the two are fatty. Because if the iser is fatty, it's understood very clearly from the Gemara in Chulin that there is a concept called piapua. Piapua says that the shuman, the fat in the piece that is fatty, travels, is mefapea into the heter, and it becomes like it was cooked. So even though tzli is kedei netila, as we paskin, if the iser is shaman, remember, iser is mefapea into the heter. And asers are completely, okay, we know that. What about a different situation? This is the Gemara in Pesachim. There's a chiddush that in the chiddush in piapua of the fat, that even if the heter is shaman and the iser is kochush, remember that? It doesn't have to be that the iser is fatty. Even if the heter is fatty and it's next to the iser, what happens is that the heter becomes ne'asar because the shuman of the heter is mefatim the iser, right? Which is kochush, and it goes back and is mefapea bekuloi. I think that's pretty much clear. Now, how that works? But it's not so clear. Why? Because there's a chakira I saw in the Badei HaShulchan. Ilan, you have it?
Yeah.
He makes an interesting chakira. When we say that the heter is mefatim the iser, the heter is the one that's fatty. Are we saying that the shuman of the heter actually makes the whole iser fat, and then the fat iser goes back and makes the heter aser? Or is the din of piapua in a heter being shaman as follows? The heter doesn't make the whole iser shaman. The iser a kochush, the lean iser, is mavliya itself kedei klipa only, kedei netila, whatever, a little bit. It's in the heat. And then because the heter is shaman, the heter shaman is mefatem the blia, and makes that blia travel into the heter further than a kedei klipa or netila. That's his chakira. He wants to analyze what is exactly happening here. It's mashma, I think he says it's mashma from the shach. I have to see it again. That it's mefatim the blia. It's not actually mefatim the whole iser. Then the iser goes back and asers the
So then you only need 60 against the Dina.
So I was thinking about that. But apparently he just says, what do we say? It's asers kuloi. Because it travels all,
I mean, look at the 60. If you had 60 against the iser, wouldn't aser kuloi. Aser kuloi just means now.
Connected the iser? Yeah, my die.
Yeah,
If you had
so,
connected the iser.
Right.
Not just the klipa. Because it goes all over.
But now if you're saying that what happens is that we're over to the klipa of the fat,
Right.
and now the fattiness of the is causing that fat to travel throughout the heter,
Right.
then you need in the hay klipa, because that's the amount of is has to do.
L'chora. I thought
And
about that.
besides that, you have to separate, you move the klipa as well.
You can't.
You have to.
No, you wouldn't be able to, because once you say it travels everywhere.
No. You can't rely on that. Let's not the heter. You can't guarantee me that it traveled. With respect to worst case scenario, the largest amount that could have traveled is the kedei. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
But that's legabe.
Right.
How much do I need in 60? The
Right.
worst case scenario. But I'm not guaranteed that it actually traveled. Like if it falls from one pot to another.
Right.
I know for sure it traveled.
Right.
So I still have to remove the klipa because maybe it remained focused. In the
Yes,
kedei.
l'chora, yeah, we had that before, that in some cases you would have to remove it anyway.
Right.
Yeah, especially if you can identify it. And it wasn't cooked later, where it got lost for sure. In some cases, even if it got cooked, you would still have to do it, right? Some opinions, right. Anyway, so that's an interesting chakira, what exactly the heter does to the, because the heter is the fatty one. When the iser is fat, I know I'm in trouble. The chiddush in Pesachim, it's a Gemara in Pesachim, not in Chulin, was that even if the heter is shaman, it could be mefat in the iser. What is exactly happening? Okay. Either way, that's what the Mechaber holds. He holds like that it's a problem. All right, that was the brief introduction. Now let's see the Mechaber. in the Chaber Sivav says, Hey Chamrinan, the Eino Oiser Lakidei Klipa, all that we've learned about Melicha now, that only Asas Kedei Klipa is Kshein Shum Achas Mechatichos Shmeina. We're neither of the pieces. Shim Oiso Shmeina, if one of them is fat, Kula Asura, then it's all Asur. V'chen Chaverta, Asura Kula. And even the one that's next to it is also Asur. It was Basar B'chalav. Why? Because Shuman Mefapea, Shuman travels.
So we're still talking here about the
Huh?
we're still talking about here about the...
Yes. Nevertheless, he makes a chiluk here as he does in Taaruvot. That Shuman makes a difference whether the Shuman is in the Gevina or the Basar. And if it's Basar B'chalav, then they're both going to be in trouble. Right? Regardless of who is Shaman. And it's no longer Kedei Klipa, it Asers Kuloi. That's pretty much the halacha in Sivov. And that's pretty much also a repetition of the halacha in Taaruvot, where...
So he doesn't follow this opinion as well. That's the Yeshulchan's second possibility, that the Isser only transfers to Klipa and then...
No, he doesn't explain the Svara.
No,
he just says it.
No, he doesn't follow that, because he asks us...
He asks a skula.
Yeah,
You're right. Based on that, no. If we have a problem, we would have a problem with the Badei Shulchan's explanation, not with the halacha. The halacha is asas kula.
You have 60.
Right, exactly, yeah. All right, so far so good. I mean, this halacha I don't think it requires much more analysis because it's the same as we've seen before. But now we come to the real inyan over here, that there's a big machlokas in the Gemara. There's a machlokas in Gemara on the following incident that occurred in Chulin, where the Rishonim have a machlokas about exactly what did the Gemara mean. A young pigeon, right, a bar gozlo, fell into a jar that contained kutach. What's kutach? Kutach appears to be a dairy dish. Huh? Some sort of dip that is milchik, that contains some salt also.
Yeah.
But it was obviously edible. It was not. It was
to some people.
Yeah, well, yeah.
They let it stand for like 4 weeks.
Whatever, yeah. But anyway, it was pretty edible. It was not Eino Necha Machmas Molchoy.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
Who was the Rav? Someone who came to this, he had to throw up?
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, yeah. So, it was quite popular. So now the question was, what do we do? Well, what's the problem? Well, the kutach is a little salty, and you have a piece of meat falling into it. So...
A whole pigeon?
Yeah, a whole pigeon, yeah. So, is the pigeon hot? Is the pigeon cold? We need to know details. So the Gemara says that depending on how the pigeon was prepared would make a difference in the outcome of the halacha. But the Gemara is not clear when the Gemara says tzli. In other words, that if it's tzli, right, then it would be aser, kedei klipa. If it's, if it's tzli, it would be aser completely. I'm sorry, one second. The Gemara was over there, one second. The Rishonim learned differently about it, and what the interpretation of the Gemara was. The Gemara says that if it would be tzli, poshup shat, it would require a klipa. And then the Gemara, right? And then the Gemara adds, well, what if it has cracks, and what if it's spiced up? Then it would be aser kuloi. Exactly. So that was pretty much the Gemara. So again, the whole way the Gemara presents the differences is not so clear, especially about the first part, about the tzli. So this is the way the machlokes goes. The Raiva, the Rashba, the Ran, they hold that what the Gemara meant, that if it's tzli, it requires only a klipa. It's talking about a tzli roiseyach. So what's the chidush? The chidush is not so much that it becomes also with a klipa, because that's just like any other hot falling into cold. That is only becomes also kedei klipa. You know what? Some of the chidush in this Gemara is that even though, like Ilan said, it was like a dip, the kutach, and the piece of meat here fell in and was enveloped by the dip. It was completely covered by it almost. So I would think now the one that's roiseyach is tato govar. Even though it's coming from the top and falling onto the cold, and ordinarily that's a klipa. So what's the chiddush? So sad, but it's a klipa. It's the togava. No. But because it's falling into a dip, semi-liquid, and it's being enveloped or covered by the kutach, I would think perhaps that the tzli would now be tatol govar, and it would be completely usher. The answer is no. Why? Because the tatol govar is very, very strong concept. That whoever was there first, something came from the top and fell on it, is the one from the top is still considered being on top and not on the bottom. So even though it's being covered up by the dip, and you would think, well, it's just as much as in the bottom as the rest of the... No, you're not at the bottom. You came from the top. So it's only also kedei klipa. So again, these Rishonim hold that sli is roiseach, and therefore and that's what the Gemara meant. It's only asus kedei klipa, and it's not any different than any hot falling into cold. Now, but if it has bekoim, cracks in the meat, or if it's very spiced up, the whole thing becomes also because the cracks in the meat, if it has them, or if it's spiced up, they can cause the milk to be absorbed into this hot piece of so even though it's falling down, even though it's a tzli, it has bekoim or spices, it absorbs the cracks. The cracks enable the milk to be absorbed into it, regardless of how it's falling in. Same thing with spices. It's like it's going to draw some milk into it. All right, that's one. Some of the Rishonim. The Rosh, the Or Zarua, Rabbeinu Peretz, Smag, Maram Rutenberg, Sefer Trumo, Tur, Maharil, a whole entourage holds that the Gemara is talking about Tzoinen Tzli, or Tzli Tzoinen. It's Tzli. This pigeon was roasted, and it's cold. Wow. Cold meat falling into a cold kutach? Yeah, but it's a little salty, the kutach is a little salty. So what's the chiddush? That even though usually meat falling into milk and they're cold, all that is required is hadocha, like we saw in the beginning of the Siman. The chiddush over here is this bird it was roasted already. Or even not roasted, it was baked. Or even cooked. Once the meat was processed through cooking, baking, or roasting, the meat has softened. And therefore, according to them, if you have roasted chicken in your refrigerator and milk fell on it, hadacha would not be sufficient. Because the meat is already roasted. Hadacha cannot take care of the problem. Make sure you don't put them close to each other. So they hold that the chiddush here is, what the Gemara is telling us is basically that once something is tzli, that even if it's falling into something cold, it becomes also kuloi. I'm sorry, by tzli it's not kuloi. Kedei klipa. Not kuloi is only by bekoim and metubal. So the main difference is that they hold that even if it's cold, it will be aser kedei klipa. Everybody's in agreement, however, if something is spiced up, metubal, or it has bekoim, that it becomes aser kuloi, because it absorbs it all over the chaticha. This last group of Rishonim, within them there's another machloikis. What about raw meat? What about raw meat that has raw meat, not cooked, whatever, that has bekoim, or that is spiced up, paprika, garlic powder, or whatever. Yeah. What would be the din there? So some say the basukula, it would be aser, even if it was not roasted at all, because bekoim and tavlin have that ability to draw in the milk throughout the entire piece. All right. What would, by the way, they hold, the ones who are saying the Gemara is talking about a cold piece of meat that was roasted, that it's they klipa, what would they hold, by the way, if it was a hot piece of it falling into the kuta? Bechor, there's no difference. Because hot falling into cold, we said, is always a kedei klipa. So what's the difference? The difference is that they're telling us, the chiddush is that even if it's cold, because it's sli, that's the chiddush, it's still going to require a klipa. But the chora would also hold that even if it were to be hot, it will still be only a klipa. So the only chiddush is that they hold that this Gemara is talking about a case of a bird that was roasted. The bird is now cold, but it's roasted. And that roastedness, even though it's, in other words, even though it's coming into cold, kutach, it's a little salty, right? It's going to absorb, even though it's cold, everything is cold. It's going to absorb kedei klipa because it's, that's all, that's the chiddush.
Going into a glass of milk which is milk.
That we will see. That's, I think the Shach speaks about that.
We are treating
The Shach speaks about it. Or that's where I noticed the difference between the Shach's interpretation of it and the Aruch HaShulchan. In other words, we now have by the Achroinim, we have a difference. I'll get to that. Yeah.
We are treating.
No. In other words, in the event that raw meat has cracks in it, in other words, it's a kind of meat which is not solid. In other words, it's...
And cooked meat.
Well, cooked, the whole idea is
To seal it.
the cooked has become softened. That's what the Mefarshim explained. The cooking, the baking, the roast has softened the meat. It is more pliable. It's more, it just can absorb easier than a raw piece of meat that has never been cooked, maybe a little bit tougher. Apparently, that's how they explain it. Raw meat is tougher. But a raw meat can have bekoim. It depends if you made cuts to it.
Depending on the type of meat?
The type of meat, yeah, exactly. I know, for example, from my father-in-law, Shalom, was a butcher. So I've seen different kinds of meats. There's a meat called top of the rib. If you ever had it, it's very tasty. It's very, very dense, and it's harder to cut. Machine to cut if you want thinner slices, especially. It's tough. It's a tougher piece of meat. Whereas other pieces of meat, like brisket, they're very soft compared to it. And some of the shoulder meat may even have bekoim, like you were saying. It depends on the meat. It may naturally have some cracks where the milk can get in. All right.
The problem is, if it has cracks, these are not going to help.
Yes, exactly. That's what some of the Achronim explained. And 60 will not help so much because we don't know how much.
Because we don't know where what's spread out.
That's correct. That's somebody points that out. Yeah, you may have a problem even with. Good point. Good observation. Yeah. All right. So let's see the Mechaber inside then. Now that we know more or less the difference in the Gemara. That which distinguish between that which can be eaten. It's not salted enough and can be edible. With that which is totally unedible because of its saltiness. That's if you're talking about a raw piece of meat. So he's giving us the halacha l'maisa based on that Gemara, right? The conclusion is tzli roi seyach. You see, pay attention. He's going with the Rishonim who hold tzli roi seyach. But if it's a hot, roasted piece of meat, so he's going with them. Shenofa lemeliach. That fell into something salty. Afilu nechal machmas molchoi. Even though it's edible, it's not so salty. Boy klipa. Right? That which I told you, that if something is not nechal machmas molchoi, it's going to give you trouble with the klipa. I only meant that by a basar chai. But if you're dealing with a tzli roi seach, shenofa lemeliach, afilu nechal machmas molchoi. It's not so salty. Boy klipa comes along Ilan the Shach on this. Afilu nechal machmas molchoi. Eino mechuvan. Adifa minei havel lashminin. You could have said even better. Afilu lo nimlach klal. Even if it's not salty at all. Even though you're saying that it's hot. Afilu lo nimlach klal. It's kedin kol cham letoich the boy klipa. So he answers. The reason the Mechaber didn't say that. So chlema mishum dekiva the nechal machmas molchoi velo nimlach klal din echod lohem lo yora ledakdek. They're going to have the same din anyway. Whether it's lo nimlach klal or afilu nechal machmas molchoi. But the Aruch HaShulchan seems to be saying that it has to be a little salty, if I recall correctly. That's the way it's understood. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a problem. And why wouldn't it be a problem if it's seyach? Right? But there appears to be a chiluk between the way he understands it and the Shach. The Shach clearly says that even if it's completely unsalted, it was still aser kedei klipa. It's a tzli roi teach. V'im yesh bo bekoim, או שהוא מטובל בטבלין והוצלי רותח כולו אסור. But if it has bekoim, cracks, is that the way you have it as translated? Ridges, or some other word?
I think we should translate it.
Yeah. Or if it's spiced up with spices, and it's a hot, it's kuloi asur. The Ramah adds to that, v'hu adin ofuyim mepushol, even if it's baked or cooked, it's the same thing as sli. Now the Ramah is the one that introduces the other shita, that even if they were to be cold, dina hachi, that a kedei klipa would always apply because it's sli.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the way the Ramah says should be the minhag if there's no hefsed. So just to recap what we just said, the Mechaber says that once you have a tzli or teach, even though the one in the bottom is not so salty, on which the Shach says, even if it's not salty at all, okay, you're still going to require klipa because that's the din of the Gemara, that tzli or teach, because it's sli, it requires kedei klipa.
Anything roteah.
Huh?
Anything that's your klipa.
Right.
If it's on the top.
If it's on the... Right. Yeah, but the Mechaber, and that's why the Aruch HaShulchan is going on, is that which we said by Melicha, that it asks kei klipa, when it's not nechal machmas molchoi, if it's nechal machmas molchoi, and therefore it shouldn't be a problem because of the Melicha, it would still aser kedei klipa, because the one that's coming on it is a tzli roiteach. It's hot, right?
So it would be
Right.
salt.
That's what the Shach says. In other words, that's where the two of them.
But I don't understand.
No, was the Shach is saying why is the Mechaber saying afilu nechel machmas molchoi? Make him say a bigger chidush. In other words, that even if it's not, it's unsalted. Yeah, but the Aruch HaShulchan seems to be learning a little bit different than the words of the Mechaber.
Then how does the Aruch HaShulchan understand it?
Because if you read literally the words of the Mechaber, it has to be a little salty. He says
Right.
it has to be a little salt in them.
But setting up the Mechaber agree that if something that's hot fell until then
Right.
you would agree with that anyway.
Yeah. Right.
So it is a very salty.
Okay, so what do we say about that?
Yeah.
What's the chiddush? So we said the only chiddush here, as opposed to stam cham letoich, is that even though it's falling in and being enveloped, that the we have to say that, otherwise, yeah.
It's a cooler. So because it's salty, it's a cooler?
No, even if it's a little salty, in other words, but it's nechal machmas molcho, it's not going to aser more. In other words, just because it's being covered up. It's being covered up.
So normally, if it fell in, we would have no question then.
Right.
So say that it's leave and just say b'chlal it's a kula against the shach. The shach is saying, of course it only requires kedei klipa even without salt. So say no. What the Mechaber is saying here is even if it is a little salty, provided it's necha machmas. So if it's only a little salt, even though it's salty, a kula, you can still only need klipa.
Right.
You don't need the envelope. This is the case.
No, but yeah.
If you want
Based
to
on
the
way the Shach learns, yeah. I mean, the way the Aruch HaShulchan learns, which I recall, says that it would make a difference if it's a little bit of salt. It has to be a little salty, he says. Then what's the chiddush?
So he says
your question is a good question. So I'm saying that it must be that the chiddush is what we said before. That here it's not falling into something solid. It's falling into something semi-liquid. Yes. Where I would think, well, maybe it will become tatog over once it falls in, like the case of Bar Gozla. Kamash Melon, that even though it falls in and it's covered up a little bit, it's still considered top to bottom and not bottom to top.
No, but what I'm saying is, if that's what you're going to be,
right.
You don't need the whole covered up. Why don't you say the same thing on the fact that it's a little rather than it covered?
Then what's the chiddush?
Chiddush is, even though it's a little salty, you might think because it's a little salty, it will be worse than klipa, maybe ketila. No, even though it's a little salty, that's still not the end of the world, and it remains only kedei klipa. So there was no salt involved at all. So it's your kula idea, but leaving away to the being enveloped, and just say with respect to the saltiness. You're saying the Mechaber is not saying here's something a chumrah. He's saying a kula.
In a sense, yeah.
Only your kula depends on its being enveloped from all sides by liquid.
Right.
But since we're talking here about a case of salty, why don't you say the same kula respect to salty? You might think that because of the salt it would be worse than kedek. Comes to the Chavah to be machadish that even though it's a little salty, this type of salt does not usher it beyond kedek. It remains kedek klipa, as though there was no salt involved at all.
Right.
So you could say that is the chiddush by the mechaber.
Oh, but, well, you know what? The thing is that he did tell us before that there's no din of tatar gov melicha.
So in that you don't even have anything.
It shouldn't be anything. Yeah, there's only din of tatar gov melicha when it's davar shamin. So even though he doesn't say that, he obviously implies that even though there may not be anything in an order decision, if the top one was the one that, well, no, here the top one is not salted. The bottom one, if anything, is a little salted. That's where the Shach says what he says. You know, what's the big chiddush over here? In the sense, it would always be kedei klipa, regardless.
But the Shach says because of tatar gavar.
Because of tatar gavar. And what are you saying in the mechaber?
That the mechaber is saying even though there is the presence of salt involved here.
Right, some salt. Right.
But this some salt doesn't make it a worst case of normal tatar gavar.
Oh, I see what it would ask a kula. You mean?
Whatever kedei natila.
Yeah.
Whatever other possibility there would be. So the Mechaber is just assuring us, like you're saying.
Yeah.
You're saying although it envelopes it from all sides, so you don't even need the envelopes, because you can just say, even though there's salt present here, and you might think that the presence of the salt is now going to cause a bigger headache.
Right.
No, this is just a regular case of tatar gavar, and it only ushes.
Yeah. That's also, you could say that way. Also, you could say that the Mechaber is making a chiluk based on the Gemara's of plain sli versus something that has bekoim and something that has metubal. Where like plain sli, nochinami would only be a kedei klipa for whatever reason. Tatar gavar, it's not salty, and and afilu nechal machmas molchoy. That's as much as it would be. In other words, because it's not very very salty. Even if it's not very salty, there will still be a klipa. Nevertheless, if it has bekoim or if it's metul betavim and sli rotech, it would be kulei osur, even if it's coming from the top. And it's absorbing through the bekoim or through the tavlin. The question is, I saw, how much spices do you need?
How much spice?
How much? What's metubal?
Metubal.
What's metubal? We said meliach machmas molchoy. In other words, it's eno nechal machmas molchoy. Do we say that by metubal too?
No, this sounds like it's a perfect that you would eat that way.
Right. So pashtus, it makes no difference how spiced up it is. But I saw in the Chavas Das brings down from Beis Lechem Yehuda that it has to be so metubo that you can't eat it because it's so spiced.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a big kula.
Yeah, exactly. But less than that, it wouldn't be. In the Chochmas Sodom Paskins like that, it has to be very, very spiced up.
Well, maybe for Ashkenazim.
The Beis Yehuda is, Yad Yehuda is choilek on this and says we don't see any chiluk in the poskim here. We say that in Onecham Machmas Molcho by Melach, we say that there's a gather like that. But by spices, we don't have such a difference between how spiced up. Once something is spiced up, normal, like you said, it would already pose a problem.
Tasty.
Yeah.
Like Hananias Kamin.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, interesting, Taz brings down here that if it's Tzlit Soinen falls into, Tzlit Soinen that is a little bit salted, Tzlit Soinen that is a little bit salted, Melicha Tzli, falls into milk, that you would answer it, even behefsa meruba. Why?
Which house is that?
In on Yud Beis. Towards the end of Yud Beis. It says like this. Anyway, towards the end. So he speaks about a situation where you have a tzlit soinen that was salted me'at, kemlicha tzli, fell into cholov, that it would be answer even behefsa meruba. So he says like this. Why am I saying that? Because even though the Ramah is mekel by tzlit soinen, right? The Ramah says, yesh omer dafilu hem tsoinenim dina hachi, that the tzli doesn't have to be reseach, even if it's cold, it falls into, right, like the rush. That it falls into milk, kutach, I should say. It's aser, kedei klipa. The Ramah says that in the end, yesh linoik im ein hefsed meruba. So the Taz says, what I'm telling you right now is in a case where it's soinen, is falling into the middle, but this tzli tzoyna was also salty enough just enough for Melicha, for a tzli, it would be aser. I hold that it would be always aser if it's a little bit salty. He says why? Because even though the Ramah himself said that you can be mekel behefsed merub by tzli tzoynen, says here you would have to say 2 hefsed merubas to be mekel. 1 hefsed meruba you would say because we can rely on the shitas that hold that tzli tzoynen is not such a problem. Plus the second hefsed meruba where the Ramah is machmir, that melicha letzli we're machmir because we're not bekim. Remember that one? Yeah. We're not bekim. How much is melicha letzli? Maybe melicha letzli is also salty enough. But the hefsed meruba he says if you only salted it a little bit letzli, you can be rely on that that's not real melicha, that asers. So he says you would have in a case of tzli tzoynu that is also salty letzli. He says I would aser. Why? Because then I have to use 2 hefsed meruba, and that I don't want to. Okay, that's just an interesting point that the Taz makes of it. And last but not least, there's an interesting Rabbi Elyahu on the last seif. The last seif says, "If ches ein basar becholov nesar de melicha or de kovush elo beachila avelo be'ano." Right? Very simple halacha. Basar becholov does not become asur min Torah through melicha or through kovush be'ano. In other words, and what we asur is only be'achila. Okay? So there's no real iser, but it's asur be'achila, but not be'ano. So Rabbi Elyahu says, Basar becholov that became asur al yidei melicha or kovush be'achila, you cannot cook it. Min Torah. He wants to say that even if they became asur only be'achila midrabanan, now, if you were to cook it, you would be isur basar b'cholam b'deraisa, and then it would be asur b'hano.
Sure. Now you're cooking basar.
Yeah, it appears to be that he's right, but the Pri Megadim on this says tzarich.
Really?
If that would be the case, yeah. Yeah, but he says yes, pasha. So it's interesting why he says it's a tzarich because lechora it's pasha. Yeah. Right? Why would it be a tzarich? But that's what he holds here. That even though that the Mechaber says clearly. There's no Isur Hanon in those cases.
Because it's a Rabban.
Right, but you're not allowed to cook it now. I don't think you can cook it.
No, but because you're not allowed to cook even meat and milk that wasn't subject to that. Let's say you had no,
because remember, sometimes we're makel by that if you couldn't find it, you cooked it, it's okay. But here you can't cook it. Chachila, yeah, you would be an Isur Deraisa. Even all you talk about here is a Kedei Klipa, but still.
By the Raisa of cooking, you also, this is not a question of taste.
It wouldn't be a question of taste.
Right, so you don't know, it doesn't matter. But when do we say that the klipa you can ignore? Yeah. That's when you're going to eat. Yeah. But that's a good question. Let's say a person cooked milk into which meat fell, and he couldn't remove the klipa because it came all mixed up together.
Sure.
Look, I may eat it, he's allowed to eat it. What about the cooking? Did he
No, so that's what he's saying over here. Right? That if you went ahead and cooked it, it would be a problem. Sure.
No, but we have expressly the heter that if you had milk that meat got, let's say, a hot meat fell into the milk.
Right.
So you have to talk var.
Right.
So you have to remove the kedei klipa from the.
Right.
But you don't know where the kedei klipa is in the milk because it all got mixed.
Right.
So you're allowed to eat it if you cooked it.
No, that's something else. But you always have shishim.
Right.
Right.
That's legabe the tam, the shishim.
Yes.
But what about legabe the isser of cooking?
Well, there's no isser because of shishim too.
But the shishim is legabe tam. Shishim also helps you with cooking.
Yeah. Well, if you don't have, you weren't mevashel the amount of the required amount.
What is the required amount?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I remember analyzing that, looking into that. First of all, it's a question of chatzi shir. It's a question of whether you have a real shir b'chdei achilas pras. Sometimes. Yeah. So no. So b'chdei achilas pras. The whole thing.
No, but that's achila.
No.
Cooking, not achila.
Right. So the question is, exactly. So that was only legabe achila. Whether you have the required amount, you're eating it together within a certain amount of time. But to cook it, it would always be aser, even a small amount.
And if it was always aser, even a small amount, then it should be for benefit as well. No. Once it was cooked.
Yeah,
that's a problem now. How can one do it?
No. Remember, yes, I remember looking into that. But remember, once something is bottled, it's bottled as though it doesn't exist. That was the chiddush. that even though you may be over on an Isser initially, that's also a question for you are, the Maisa, it's bottle. So it's
Bottle, are you saying that
bottle,
with respect to eating?
yeah, the Gabel eating. In other words, so there's no question of ano either, because it's if something is bottle, it is as though it does not exist. I remember something like that, but it's a very good point.
But I remember now remotely the whole long pill on the question of...
Look it up for me.
Yes,
look it up for me.
the question of benefit. There is but I think it's by using a pot that was used of blias.
Right.
And there you're not allowed to, and there because of Hana, you're not allowed to sell it to Goy.
Exactly, right. But it's still there. But once something is bottled, it's bottled. I remember the Iker Nekuda was Bitul. Once Bitul exists, we say that it is as though the Isser does not, it's not there. But anyway, if you find something, let me know. I would be interested to see what. Anyway, so we're done, Baruch Hashem, with Siman Tzadik Aleph. We'll continue.